I hope everyone is doing well. It's great to be here. I have talked about a progression of events for the past 3 years that has gotten me some attention. And certainly, when I started talking about these events, I had no idea how fast that they would really speed up. We're seeing a great acceleration in these events that culminate with something called the Great Reset. When Klaus Schwab stood up on a stage and saying, "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy, you'll rent," I thought he was kind of a nut job. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized that what he was saying was actually a possibility. And so when I talk to you all about this potential reset, it comes from a perspective of assets being blown up to all-time highs through crazy monetary policies where more money was created in the last 3 years than in the history of the United States preceding it, where interest rates were suppressed to levels that created massive distortions and misallocations of resource and capital, where price discovery has become impossible, where people think it's actually normal to see their home prices double and triple in 1 year, to think it's normal that their crypto portfolios would go up 5-fold in a year, or their equity portfolios 2-3x. I come from a period of time where if you make 6 or 7% in a year, you're a rock star. So as we talk about, could there be a great reset? Could it happen? I want you to think about where we are in the cycle, where really price discovery is something that I don't think any of us really understand what fair value is until we see an equilibrium between real interest rates and asset prices. So as I go through this presentation, please keep that in mind, that we're dealing with a period of time where it's very difficult to know what is fair value in just about anything. So with that being said, I will start. So I ask people this question all the time, and it's shocking to me that so few people really know the answer. I ask, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? And you don't have to raise your hand if you know it, but I bet a lot of you are saying, I don't know what makes the dollar the world reserve currency. So at the end of World War II, the Allies all met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and they anointed the dollar the world reserve currency, and it was to take over for the pound sterling. And the idea was that the United States would guarantee other governments could exchange their dollars in for gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. And that's what made the dollar the world reserve currency. It was as good as gold. Governments at any time could take their dollars and exchange them back to the Treasury for gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. And as we got towards the end of the Vietnam War, President de Gaulle from France said, you know, I think you guys are printing more dollars to fund the war than you have gold backing it at Fort Knox. And so he sent warships over to New York Harbor filled with dollars and demanded that we give him back gold for it. And we did. And that's when President Nixon closed the gold window, rendering the dollar fiat in 1971, August of 1971. And it was 3 years later that Henry Kissinger was dispatched to Saudi Arabia, and he struck a deal with the Saudis. And he said, how about this? We'll protect you. We will provide you military support, and nobody will ever mess with you ever again. And for that, you and OPEC will denominate oil globally in US dollars. And it has been that way, really, for the better part of 50 years. What has made the dollar the world reserve currency is this synthetic demand that was created by the fact that if you needed oil any part of the world, you needed to have dollar reserves in order to buy oil. So it's created a synthetic demand for a currency that is backed by nothing but the protection of the Saudi kingdom and by extension, OPEC's agreement to value oil in dollars. And really that is why the dollar is the world reserve currency. So keep that in mind as we move forward. There were many things that happened along the way, but this one here in 2019 really caught my eye because, in 2017 really is when it started, okay? In 2017, the German Bundesbank, who for a few years have been trying to get their gold back from the US, publicly said, give us our damn gold back already. And they went and made a really big stink about it publicly. We want our gold back, give it back. Took us 4 years to send their gold back, but within a few weeks of that happening, the Bank of Austria, the Bank of Hungary, the Czech National Bank, Bank of Poland, Bank of Turkey, all of the banks said the same thing, give us our gold back. Now, this was weird because this was 2017 after 6 years of a bear market where from 2011 to 2017, I would have rather played golf and not own a metals company. It was a rough time to be involved in precious metals as it was straight line down and the central banks were selling, yet all of a sudden in 2017, all these banks said, give us back our gold, central banks. The next year, those same banks bought more gold as a group than they did in the 60 years previously combined. And that trend continued in 2019 when the Bank of International Settlements, the most powerful bank in the world, the central bank, put gold on a level parallel or equal to cash. This is a really big deal, right? So you have to wonder, did the central banks know that this was coming? Did they know the BIS was going to reclassify gold? Did they know they were going to make it on par with cash? I would argue, hell yes, they knew. And so they front ran, and you'll find this is a common theme, front running. The people closest to the information typically are sitting comfortably positioned well before the trend happens. And, we can parallel that to 2022. Do you think there's any coincidence that the central banks have bought more gold than at any time in the last 55 years? I don't think there's a coincidence. Just like this wasn't a coincidence prior to the 2 years of massive accumulation by the central banks of the East. When this came about, I couldn't believe that more people weren't talking about the Belt Road Initiative, and I'll ask you once again, how many of you people really know about the Belt Road Initiative? Most people don't. This guy does, and he should, and more of you should. It's very instrumental, I think, in shaping what is coming. And the Belt Road Initiative is the largest infrastructure project in human history ever attempted. It is connecting Asia and Africa and parts of South America and Europe, encompassing right now about 152 countries, close to 80% of human population. And guess who's not part of it? The United States. Most of it is settling on the new Chinese digital yuan, which is a central bank digital currency that has shown now for 3 or 4 years close to 20 billion in settlements that it works. And I believe it will be the rails of what comes next, or where I'm going with this. But the Belt Road Initiative really started to cement my feeling that something is going on here and the U.S. is not part of it. But the rest of the world is rallying against the Western hypocrisy and the Western way of doing things that was, I think, isolating us from the rest of the world. The hegemony that was starting to have real effects. This is where I really started to notice it. But when it really took shape for me was the day we left Afghanistan. And if you grew up in the United States when I did, the theory or the thought of leaving a serviceman or woman behind enemy lines was unthinkable. The way that we left Afghanistan with our own servicemen and women behind enemy lines and the freedom fighters from Afghanistan who dedicated their lives to helping us behind enemy lines was a horrible day to be an American patriot. I found it embarrassing. And there is no coincidence that the day after this happened, Saudi Arabia announced what was a joint military cooperation agreement with Russia. And, I thought it was us that was protecting the Saudis, right? The fact that Russia says we are now protecting Saudi Arabia, and Nigeria made the exact same admission the day after, was startling. I said, screaming, whoever would listen to me, the petrodollar is dead today. It's over. This is the beginning of the end for the petrodollar. The fact that we are no longer the only entity protecting the Saudi kingdom absolutely 100% signaled the very beginning of the end of the United States as being the sole world reserve currency of the world. And it was very obvious the day after that, Zero Hedge published an article talking about hypersonic ICBMs that were outfitted on all of the Russian nuclear submarines. It was their way of saying, it was Putin's way of saying, do not even think of messing with us the way that you did with Hussein and the way that you did with Gaddafi. It's different this time. And I do believe that was the very, very beginning of the end. But what made it even worse was the weaponizing of the U.S. dollar and kicking Russia out of the SWIFT system. This is what is getting everyone to the table. This is what is the rallying cry that is bringing everyone to the table against the Western hypocrisy, against the Western sanctions and the Western way of declaring rules that if you don't do what we say, there are sanctions and there are consequences. And I think this one move in and of itself really sped up the process of de-dollarization. As you will see as we continue through here, I think this, more than any single event, is the one thing that is making the rest of the world say, are we next? Could it be us? Will they freeze our assets? And I think this is going to ultimately lead to a much more expedited departure from the dollar, a de-dollarization, if you will. So when this came out, when I've been saying for the last 2 years that the BRICS nations are going to join together and they're going to have a commodity-backed currency and it will be pegged to gold. I thought that because why else would the BIS reclassify gold to a level that puts it on par with cash? Why else would all the central banks be massively accumulating gold? Why is 70-80% of human population rallying against the dollar in this new Belt Road initiative? And why are you seeing all of these countries that are formulating agreements and the U.S. isn't part of it? In March of 2020, I said there will be a new BRICS currency and it will be pegged to gold. And then all of a sudden, they admit it, that we're going to issue a new world reserve currency and it will be pegged to commodities. I believe it will be pegged to gold. If you look at the amount of gold that these countries are accumulating, it's off the charts. China is the largest producer and importer of gold in the world. Russia has been importing more gold than anyone next to China. India is really close on that list, and South Africa produces it all. The RICS and BRICS, Russia, China, India, South Africa, they are the epicenter of gold. And what better way to stand up against the Western hypocrisy and hegemony than to issue a currency that is pegged to gold, which is the glue that makes it all work. Some people say, well, the euro didn't work because they all have different viewpoints on the world. And okay, I agree with that. But this will work. It is the rallying cry against the dollar that is bringing everyone to the table. It is the glue. The gold will be the glue that makes it stick. And what better way to roll out a central bank digital currency than to go on the rails of 4 years of successful beta testing with the Chinese digital yuan. Now it's starting to get really exciting. And when you see the expansion of BRICS and Algeria and Argentina and Egypt, all of these countries, but Saudi Arabia. I mean, hello, Saudi Arabia wants to join BRICS. And why the hell would they want anything to do with the West, who is going green? When all of these countries and the BRICS Plus and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which I'll talk about in a moment, comprise 80% of human population, if not greater, and they are not going green. And if you look at who are the countries that are accumulating all the gold, these are the countries that are accumulating all of the gold. Turkey was number 1 on the list this last year. India was number 2, and Kazakhstan was number 3. All three of them are either part of the Shanghai Corporation Organization or the BRICS nations. The countries that want admittance into this new group will use gold as their means to solidify their place in the new world order. A few weeks ago, Saudi Arabia comes out and says, hey, China, you are our number one priority with oil, not just this year, but for the next 50. If you don't understand how significant this is, it has been, Saudi Arabia has been we have been their priority for the last 50 years, and that is a privilege that is coming to an end, and you can see right there where it's going. The ramifications of this are extraordinary. Remember, we're talking about this from asset prices at all-time highs. So we'll talk about what this means in a moment. The Shanghai Corporation Organization is something I don't talk about enough, but it is a massive, massive organization. In fact, the world's largest regional organization, predominantly in security and defense and economics. It comprises 60% of the Eurasian landmass, nearly 60% of global population, and 30 to 40% of global GDP. You know what the rumor is right now? That they are going to have a Eurasian settlement currency tied to gold. And this is more than just a rumor. This is beginning to be really darn close to fact, as all of the sources that I read and talk to are saying, yes, this is happening. And when you talk about the strength in numbers, all of this is void of U.S. participation. 7 of the 13 OPEC producing countries are either in the BRICS or have applied to BRICS. Every single one of the OPEC producing countries, all 13 of them, are on the Belt Road Initiative. And 60% of human population and 60% of Eurasian landmass and nearly 40% of global GDP is in the Shanghai Corporation Organization. And guess who's not part of any of it? That's right, the United States. Big deal. And as we've been told in both cases, in whether we're talking the BRICS currency or the Shanghai Corporation Organization, they will both use gold to peg to their new system. Whether it be a new BRICS currency that will be pegged to gold. Remember, in order to get everyone to the table, all you have to do is say, look at what those bastards in the West are doing. They're going to freeze your assets. They're going to kick you out of SWIFT. Heck, Europe just voted to take the assets that they froze from Russia and use them to rebuild the Ukraine. So all of these other countries who maybe don't really like what the U.S. is doing, well, that's the rallying cry. It is the gold pegged to a new system that will be the glue that makes it work. So whether it be the BRICS currency or whether it be the petro yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, or the new settlement currency by the Shanghai Corporation Organization, do you think there's any coincidence? Do you think that this is any coincidence that the central banks have bought more gold than at any time in the last 55 years? Look at the 3 countries that are leading the way. Turkey just joined the BRICS. India's in the BRICS. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, all of these countries are part of the Shanghai Corporation Organization. They are preparing for a global shift. We are witnessing a massive de-dollarization. And here's the nail on the dollar coffin. Just came out a few days ago. Saudi Arabia said at this latest meeting that at Davos that they are open to taking other currencies for oil settlement. Why? Because there's strength in numbers. In and of themselves, these countries cannot stand up to the West. But together, they have a bigger GDP, a bigger military presence, and they are indeed coalescing together against the Western hypocrisy, against the Western hegemony, and they are coalescing against the West. It's happening. It's happening. I'm telling you, this is happening. The world is moving to de-dollarization. There's no question about that, but let's just play it out for 1 second, right? What happens? How does it happen? How does the Great Reset that Klaus Schwab talked about happens? It's really very easy. Saudi Arabia gets up on stage after all of the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, and they say to the West, hey, thank you. Thank you for the memories. It's been great. We appreciate the 50 years of protection. But you know what? You guys are going green. You've already told us you're going green. We've partnered up with 80% of human population. And they're not going green. And so we're going to open up oil sales in other currencies. Maybe they say we're just going to do it in the new petro yuan, or maybe it's going to be the new BRICS currency, the central bank digital currency pegged to gold. But what I will tell you is this: when that happens, when that really happens, now we just saw they're open to it, but when it happens, bang, just like that, every country on the planet that's had to own dollars to buy oil will dump those dollars. And a tidal wave, a tsunami of inflation will hit the shores of the West. And when that happens, God help us all, because all of these assets are inversely correlated to what? To a spike in interest rates. When you see that inflationary tsunami hit the shores of the West, you will see a spike in interest rates that has to rise in order to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. The Federal Reserve is a sideshow. They will never raise rates high enough to compensate. They will never raise rates high enough to tackle inflation. If this happens and the dollar loses its singular world reserve currency and every country on the planet no longer needs to hold dollars in order to buy oil, just wait and see what happens to asset prices in the wake of interest rates that spike to the moon. The three pillars of wealth in the United States or in the West are what? Stocks, bonds, and real estate. All are inversely correlated to a rise in interest rates. So what Jay Powell tells you, well, we're going to raise it by another quarter point, that's all a bunch of crap. Wait until see what happens when the dollar loses its world reserve status. So what Klaus Schwab said isn't so crazy after all. I think the rest of the world is coming to a point in time where they just say, you know what? Enough is enough. And now we have a whole schoolyard worth of people to stand up against the bully. And I think if you don't own gold right now, you're making a big mistake. You need to own gold like the way the rest of the world is doing. And I'll say one last thing. I know I'm out of time. If you're not a contrarian, as my good friend Rick Rule out there somewhere will say, if you are not a contrarian, you will be a victim. And the rest of the world is showing us this. So thank you for your time. I wish I had more, but thank you.